I love samosas! We make our samosas with potatoes and a lot of interesting spices, some you may have not heard of before. They're a bit daunting to make the first time, but they're a staple in our household, and I hope they'll become one in yours. So you start the samosas by boiling some potatoes. You can cut them up to hasten the boiling process, but we boil them whole. And here is the host of spices and aromatics that you're gonna need for your samosas. Here we have, well, that is leftover deep fry oil from the last time we made samosas, not Nancy's yogurt. We have chili powder, turmeric, it's in a curry powder container, but it's turmeric, garam masala. This is coriander powder. We got a giant thing of it from an Indian market, and these are Indian chilies. So a lot of these things we got from an Indian market, and you probably have an Indian market somewhere nearby, and it's definitely worth checking out to get these unique ingredients, like fenugreek. Well, this fenugreek we actually got at Winco, bulk. Winco's another great place to get spices. This looks like fennel, and this, I doubt you're gonna find at Winco, it's amchur powder. It's from mango. Very interesting ingredient, and we were gonna just make it without, but my boyfriend insisted we go to the Indian market and get some, and I'm glad he did, as well as these curry leaves. These are extremely unique and a very distinctive, interesting odor and flavor, and I would definitely miss it if the curry leaves were absent. Garlic and ginger are very important for all Indian cuisine, as is an onion and some salt. And we have a mortar and pestle here. This is a pretty decent investment if you're going to be doing a lot of Indian cooking or cooking with a lot of spices. So we take some whole coriander seeds and we are crushing them in the mortar and pestle with the fennel seeds. You don't need to crush it, completely, and that's why using mortar and pestle is nice, because you don't necessarily want to crush them to a fine powder in this case. Then we have ginger garlic paste and chopped onions. Our potatoes are boiling meanwhile. And this is the Indian green chili I mentioned before. Ghee and flour and salt, and guess what I'm doing right now? I'm making the wrappers. So this is an interesting pastry. It's got a much lower fat content than like a pie dough, if you've made pie dough before. So I've got, I'll put the actual proportions in the description below, because I don't know them off the top of my head as I'm narrating this right now. So check the description for the exact amounts. But you want to combine your flour and your ghee and just mix it together until it becomes a crumbly pastry, like this. So you'll reach this point when you're making other pastry doughs as well, but it's a lot drier. And now I'm adding a fair amount of water. And it doesn't have to be cold water in this case. This is different from, a typical pie dough for Western pies. And you don't want to overwork the dough, but you can actually work this dough a little more than a Western pastry dough. Everyone say hi to Falaya. And it looks like I'm kneading it, but I'm really just pressing to combine. Add more water as needed. And when you have a solid piece of dough, stop and let that rest for at least 30 minutes. Now what we're doing here is we are putting some of that oil, that leftover deep fried oil, into a pan and adding our crushed spices, and it should immediately smell wonderful. After, a minute or so and the spices are fragrant, you add your other aromatics, the onion, the ginger garlic paste, the chili. Meanwhile, our potatoes have fully cooked, so we're going to drain them. And I like this method for cooking potatoes because not only does the potato retain all of its starch, but it's pretty easy to peel afterwards. It's a little hot. You'll develop asbestos fingers over time, though. And there are our peeled potatoes, and you're going to mash them with a simple potato masher. You don't want to use a food processor because it'll develop the potato starch too much and make it kind of gluey. Now these are these curry leaves I told you about earlier. They smell kind of like really old car. Like if you pop a really old car's engine and smell the inside. So that's kind of what these curry leaves smell like. I know that doesn't sound very appetizing, but believe me, they add this really, really nice note to the samosas. And I definitely want to try using curry leaves in my cooking more whenever I make Indian food. They keep a long time in your refrigerator too, so it's worth getting a bunch of them. Now we're adding those cooked mashed potatoes. You can use leftover mashed potatoes in samosas too, incidentally. They're just gonna have a lot of fat, so you might wanna like not use fat otherwise in the filling. And we're adding a huge mixture of all of those spices that I showed you earlier. And just stirring to incorporate, get all those flavors together. At this point, you'll also want to season to taste with some salt and add the curry leaves. And at this point, at the very end, I turn off the heat and I add frozen peas to the mixture because it adds a really nice bright note. Now we're pouring that leftover deep fry oil into the pan. It's a good idea to strain it. And that's not enough oil, so we're adding more oil. And you're going to put this on a much higher heat than you normally would to fry chicken or other things because we're really only needing to cook the outside pastry. Now, I'm speeding this footage up just so it doesn't take so long, but I'm dividing this piece of dough into 24 balls. So I'm dividing it into 4s, and then I'm dividing each 4th into 6. So into 2, and then each half of that into 3. And you're going to wind up with 24 little pieces of dough. Each one of those little pieces you're going to very carefully roll out into a circle. And I find that the initial pressings and rolls really dictate the size, not the size, the shape of the circle. And I'm really bad at this, by the way. Try to keep these as round as possible. If you're bad at this like I am and you want them to be like really perfect looking, you can always use like a large circular pastry cutter afterwards to like cut the excess dough off and make them perfect circles. You can also do half circles. I've seen people do that and it makes a really nice little triangle shape, but we're doing whole circles with this video. You want to roll these very thin too. You want to kind of be able to see your hand through it. And now Joshua's going to show us how to fill them. And this is his first time doing it with this batch, so it's a little bit wonky, but he's going to show you again later on in the process. So as you can see, he's using water as a glue, basically, to make like a little cone of the dough. And he's sticking the cone part of it into his fist, into his hand, and letting the non-cone parts drape over his hand as he fills it with the filling. And to be honest, he overstuffed these a little bit. And some of the filling fell out of some of them. So don't stuff it this full. And see that free flap of dough that's hanging over? You want to fold that over to complete your triangle. And if this is confusing to you, like when I fold samosas, because this doesn't really work with my brain, I usually just fold them like I fold pot stickers. So, you know, as long as you really tightly seal all of the sides, you're good. Now when your oil is, you know, shaking like that and faint wisps of smoke are coming from it, it's ready to put your samosas in. You don't want to overcrowd the pan when you're deep frying. Maybe 4, maybe 5 samosas per pan at a time, depending on how big they are. And they only need a couple minutes per side. After a minute, you can already like flip and check. And I like if there's little brown spots or blackish spots at the bottoms of the samosas, but they should start puffing. That's another reason you really need to roll this pastry out quite thin. And after about 1 to 2 minutes on each side, they'll look about like this. You want them to be nice and golden brown. And like I said, a few little brown blackish spots are really nice. Use a slotted spoon or, you know, one of those spiders to take them out of the oil and stick them on a wire rack that is on top of paper towels to drain. You don't want to stick them directly on the paper towels to drain because then they'll be soggy. If you leave them on a rack like this, they'll be nice and crisp when it's time to eat them. He's going to show you again how to fold the samosa a little bit better this time. So you fold over one side, apply water as glue, fold over the other side, pinch together to close, and make your funnel. slide your funnel inside of your cupped hand. And really make sure that bottom corner is pinched tight. And then while your girlfriend hovers over your shoulder, like really way too close, fill the samosa. And again, he's been filling these two full. This one was a little better than the last one though. And then you take that extra flap and you press it over. And just make sure everything is all sealed up. And there you have it. There's your samosas. They're delicious with chutney and any kind of sweet and sour sauce. And I hope you give them a try.